a grist mill, for there was obviously no church building. Last April 9th, which was the nearest Sunday to April 7th, 1628, we brought over the young minister from Van Huysen to be here in our pulpit. So we went back last Sunday to his little church, from whence came Jonas Michaelius 350 years ago. It was a most inspiring experience. But on Saturday, the day before we had the service at Van Huysen, 4 people from Brussels came to see Ruth and myself in our hotel in Amsterdam. One of them is the European manager of the American Management Association, a Belgian citizen who speaks perfect English. And he and his wife and an associate and his wife came to visit us. They told us that the motivational movement, which is sweeping America, has gotten to Belgium, and that he's organized groups all over Belgium, all over Scandinavia, and in the United Kingdom. And these people come together to find inspiration for self-improvement. And he said, and his eyes lighted up as he said it, I have found that when you can get a group of people together in a meeting for some high-minded purpose, miracles happen with those people. It's astonishing. It is the world's wonder. It's a miracle. It's the greatest romance in the world. What Almighty God can do with human beings when human beings will let go and let God take over. Old Joe up there the other day in St. Paul was electrifying those people. He didn't tell them this story. He just exposed them to a tremendous enthusiasm and excitement. That's what happened. So number one thing about it, having something wonderful happen, is to give your life to God and let Him run it. And the second thing is to follow Jesus. Now, I know you'd expect a preacher to say that, but unfortunately, all too many don't. But we do. These preachers we got here with us do. Jesus is the main asset of the Christian religion. He is the main asset of history. He is the main asset that you've got. Jesus. What a man. Tremendous. You know, I was thinking the other day about the first sermon I ever preached. Or no, it was the second. First one I preached was in Rhode Island. The second one I preached was in Ohio. And my father was a superintendent of churches. He had a number of ministers under his supervision. One of them was ill. So my father said to me, Norman, how about going out there and preaching at that country church? Have you got a sermon? I said, Dad, you never heard a sermon like I've got. I've got a terrific sermon. He said, how, you've got it written out? I said, yes. Well, he said, you're prepared then for Sunday, aren't you? I said, I sure am. This sermon will really blow them out of the pews. And he said, well, read it to me, will you? So I read it to him. Now, my father used to sit in a rocking chair, and he'd put his feet up on the porch railing. It was the summertime. And he liked peanuts for some strange reason. He'd always have a bag of them. And while I was reading this sermon, he was throwing peanuts down the hatch. And I got through. It was on the kinetic theory of the atonement. Do you know what that is? I don't either. But at any rate, I thought I did at that time. So I read it to him. I said, how do you like that, huh? He said, you know, Norman, out back, we've got a thing called an incinerator. Now, you just take that sermon out back and burn it up. Because none of those people would understand what you're talking about, and you don't know what you're talking about. He said, why'd you go into ministry, son? I said, to get people converted to Jesus. Well, he said, then go out and talk to them about Jesus. Not all this theological business. Go out there and talk to them about Jesus. Well, I said, I don't think I can talk very long. Well, he says, that'll be a blessing. So I went out. I can see it yet. The corn was knee-high. That must have meant it was around the 4th of July, because he always used to say in Ohio, the corn's knee-high by the 4th of July. And there was a grove of trees around the church. And they still had horses and buggies in those days, and they were horses were pulling their feet, whinnying. There were a few old Fords gathered around. And I stood out back waiting for the congregation to assemble, scared to death. And I went in. Church was full. Full of good old Middle West farmer people. You know, a great old American audience. And I told them what little I knew. Took me about 10 minutes. But I told them about Jesus and what Jesus had done for me and how much I loved him and how much he would do for them. And then I closed up the service, and a big old farmer came up, and he said, son, how about going home for dinner with us? I said, yes, sir. I went home. We sat out on the porch while all the women folks went back into the kitchen, and these delectable odors were wafted out on the July air. And all of the fellas on the front porch were getting hungrier by the minute. And this old farmer sat down beside me. He had a hand that must have been as big as a ham. He's a great big man, and he brought it down on my bony knee. And he said, son, you got a lot to learn about preaching. You know that, don't you? I said, yes, sir, I sure do. Well, he said, you're right about one thing. You talked about Jesus. He said, if all your life until the day you die, you keep on talking about Jesus, you will reach the human heart. And then he pulled out a big handkerchief and he blew his nose in a stentorian fashion, and he got up and went away. And one of the other men said, don't mind him. He was a bad man in this community, and he found Jesus, and Jesus changed him. And he can't talk about Jesus without getting emotionally worked up. He'll be all right. He'll be back in a minute. Sure enough, he was back in a minute. We had a glorious dinner like they used to have. And as I left him that day, he ruffled up my hair. He said, boy, I like you. Just keep Jesus central in the message. Well, this old boy is no doubt dead and gone now. He's dead but not gone, because he's walking right down the aisle of this church, isn't he, this morning? You see him, I see him. Great, big, sturdy guy. Jesus got him. And Jesus gets the biggest men among us. Jesus gets the greatest women among us. Jesus gets the greatest minds among us, because nobody has ever been able to think as he had. He is the amazement and the astonishment of the scholars of all time